All right, you know what it is. This is the Big Douglas Show. It is a misery Monday, unfortunately, but still we'll have a good time talking about it. To break it all down with me today is Cakes from the Sports Junkies. Cakes, what's happening?
What's up, man? Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate
Oh,
it.
absolutely. Thank you for doing it.
Sure.
I'm always a stickler for trying to figure out nicknames. How did you get Cakes?
It kind of goes back a long way. JP gave it to me as one of my obviously showmates from the Junkies back when we were in high school. I mean, we grew up together. I don't really know the derivation of Johnny Cakes, but I guess it's kind of an old school nickname. So he tabbed me with it, and it's just something that kind of resurfaced once we started doing the radio show. It's kind of weird. Like, didn't use it during college, but then once we started doing radio, like it just kind of stuck, and here I am. I wish I had a better backstory for it. I don't. I've told people many times over the years I should make up a better story, but that's the story, and I'm sticking with it.
Over 20 years, the four of you have been doing this now. What do you think is the key to your longevity? I mean, in a business that, recycles all the time, it's been an amazing run.
I think it's something that people tell us whenever we're out and about doing an appearance, whether it's been in a bar in DC 15 years ago or at Junkies Poker Open at MGM National Harbor. We have people who come up who are, within probably a 5 to 7 year age range, younger or older than us, that tell us, hey, man, you're just like me and 2 of my buddies, or me and 3 of my buddies that hang out, that talk not only about sports, talk about life, talk about our kids, stuff that's going on in our lives besides sports. I think that people just they know it's genuine. We've grown up and known each other for 40 plus years, 45 plus years, and that's not something you can manufacture. It's not something you can fake with 2 or 3 other or 4 other people that you just plop down in a studio together. It's going to school together. It's going to each other's weddings. It's knowing each other and hanging out with each other through thick and thin for 4+ decades, and I think that resonates with people.
Not that the gig you have in Washington isn't a great one. It is, but I'm curious if you guys had ever thought about going bigger, let's say, and more national, like an ESPN type gig.
I mean, we've had little dalliances over the years where we've been approached as far as doing certain national programs, and we had a short stint where we actually did have our radio show simulcast into a bunch of different markets. But for us, it's always just been the comfort level of us all having grown up here in the DC area, having lived here our entire lives. The local market has been awesome to us. They've been very responsive to us, and we've had a blast doing the show for almost 30 years, almost exclusively in this market. We've never had to move. We've never had to go to a different spot. We've been able to raise our families here in the same spot, which is, it's hard to do sometimes in the media business. So we're very thankful for that. And we're happy to still be doing it in 2022 and beyond.
They've got cameras in now. Do you like that? Is that an annoyance? I'm actually surprised I haven't done it with some of the other shows since they've already got cameras in the building.
You know what? We've talked about this. Like, we just act like the cameras aren't even there. That's kind of the way we've approached it. For us, the radio show has always been the core central product. And it's great to have a TV component to that. But, we try not to even pay attention to the fact that the cameras are there. It's great that they're there. We have a really good relationship with NBC Sports Washington. They've been a great partner for us. But the one seed has always been the radio show, and anything outside of that has been an ancillary product. I mean, we're happy to do it. We're glad the cameras are there, but we honestly don't pay them that much attention. As you can tell by the way we dress every day on the air.
I mean, that's the way to do it, right? Let's see. You guys are as connected as anybody to DC and the organization. And news comes out that Danny's selling. At first it's all of it. I talked to AJ Perez last week from FOS. He thinks it's for all of it. Did have the King story, I think, come out this morning that, maybe it is a partial. Do you think it'll be sold, and do you think it'll be all of it? And are you very excited?
Well, going back to what you said before, I don't know how well connected we are as far as, like, we've never been on the inside that inner sanctum of Redskins, Washington football team, Commanders. We've always kind of been on the outside looking in. Going back to when we first started on WJFK on the weekends, the station actually had a relationship, actually aired the games. That was back in the late 90s, maybe in the early 2000s. But our company has not held those rights for many, many years. So we're almost kind of outsiders when it comes to covering the Commanders at this point. But getting back to the sale question, it's great news if Dan Snyder sells. I mean, Dan Snyder has taken a franchise that people in this area and around the world that were Redskins fans, he's taken a cherished thing, a franchise that people used to pass down tickets generation to generation, and basically I've equated it to flying it into the side of a mountain and destroying it, because compared to what this franchise used to be and to what it is now, like, could you imagine this franchise 25 or 30 years ago having 25,000 Vikings fans in the stands for a regular season game?
Yeah.
It never would have happened.
No.
I mean, those stands would always have been filled with burgundy and gold. You're seeing the fan erosion. You see competing fan bases coming in here on a weekly basis whenever there are home games. It's embarrassing. The franchise has become a borderline laughingstock in NFL circles. And I think a fresh owner, new ownership, new ideas, fresh blood is nothing but great for the franchise and for the Commanders fans that have stuck around through, I would say mediocrity, but mediocrity might be too kind of a word for what they've experienced over the past 25 years. So I think it's fantastic if Dan Snyder sells. This town should and probably will throw some sort of parade when that happens, because they'll feel like, hey, we can start fresh. We can press the reset button and hopefully get back to those glory years of the 80s into the early 90s.
It's just incredible what he's done to the organization. It feels like it would be impossible to do what he's done to a thriving NFL franchise. I don't think we'll feel sorry for him when he walks away with $7 billion. But it'll be nice to have him gone. I can't imagine it's been fun being the owner of your favorite football team, which seems like an impossibility, right? I mean, Dan can't be having fun owning the team right now.
He can't be a happy person. How could you be happy taking something that he cherished as a kid? Yeah. I mean, he grew up a huge Redskins fan, and they've had nothing but embarrassment, scandal, poor records, infrequent playoff appearances. You just keep adding to it, congressional investigations, toxic workplace. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Like, I'm sure he'll be happy, like you said, pocketing billions. I mean, he's going to walk away with a handsome sum, but he has to be embarrassed by the whole thing. I mean, unless he's just completely beyond embarrassment at this point, which I think he might be. I think he's gotten to the point where he's so insulated that he almost revels in being the bad guy and being the villain. But you know that he's jealous of other owners that win, of owners that have Lombardi trophies. Now, he can trot out the Lombardi trophies for what people who previously owned the team have done, but you know it irks him that he wasn't ever able to rise to that level of success like Jack Kent Cooke did, his predecessor.
Well, and incredible, too, because you talk about rich guys not being rich guys, but whether it was his lack of money, let's say, but well documented. Chris Baker told us that the facilities and the training staff at Ashburn hadn't gotten revamped since Clinton Portis was there until Robert got hurt. So it's not, people say all the time, like, oh, well, what will a new owner do? You still have to win on the field. Well, having a guy like Bezos who could influx just millions and millions of dollars into new facilities and infrastructure, I think is something that people forget about.
Sure. And you bring up a great example with, I guess it's called Commanders Park now. I mean, I haven't been out there since Joe Gibbs version 2.0, since he rolled back into town, but from what you're saying, I hear the same things, that the facility is antiquated. It's so out of date, old equipment. I mean, the NFL is now an arms race. You can't woo free agents and bring them out to an old broken down spot that hasn't been upgraded in 40 years. And, okay, so you put up a bubble a few years ago. Big deal. Like teams already have that. Like you're already playing catch up. Like you've seen the brand new sparkling facility at the University of Maryland as far as for their football program. They realized that if they wanted to compete in the Big Ten, if they wanted to be taken seriously, they had to have an upgraded practice facility. So what did they do? They basically gutted Cole Fieldhouse. They built, a palace, a shrine to when they bring in recruits, they can say, hey, we've got facilities on the same level as a Michigan or an Ohio State. Like the Commanders have to do the same thing. And maybe Dan Snyder over the years just did not want to, put that sort of capital into a practice facility without getting a new stadium kind of attached to it. But if you've got a guy with super deep pockets, a guy like Jeff Bezos or, insert other multi-billionaires name in the blank, that they would just, check that off. Say, yeah, sure. Spend X amount for the new practice facility. It doesn't give me the best of what you can. Like that's the sort of approach I think they need going forward. That's that fresh infusion of new capital that will be here when hopefully the new owner takes over, whenever that might be.
Well, think about it, Cakes. You got the Bama helmet behind you. I got my Georgia visor on today. These guys are leaving colleges, and the facilities are like way, way down, like going to high school from college for a lot of these guys. It's just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, you see, if you look on Twitter every other week, it seems like a different university is unveiling a $200 million like practice facility. I think University of Florida is one of the newest that's done it in the SEC, and they do it because they realize that to woo recruits, to bring in recruits, to impress people, to impress these kids, you can't have facilities from 1997. You just can't. They have to keep pace. It's something that the Commanders have had a problem with. Obviously, the same with the stadium. Anytime we see a ranking of stadium experiences and fan experiences, FedEx Field is either the worst or toward the bottom. So hopefully that's another key thing as far as the new ownership coming in. You're going to have somebody that these cities or municipalities that they're going to want to work with this new person to get the stadium built. Nobody wants to get into business right now with Daniel Snyder. Why would you want to attach yourself to doing business with a guy who has such a bad and stained reputation?
And probably for $1 billion it costs you to do that.
Exactly. Like how are you going to convince your constituents that live in your county or your city to spend their tax dollars on either the stadium or the infrastructure around the stadium to help benefit Dan Snyder? Like he's just left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. People are over him. So I think whoever that new owner is, I think all of a sudden you're going to see it's much easier to get a lot of that business done with that person in charge.
Where do you rank the four major sports group teams for you on your fandom level?
Me personally, it's a good question. Are you talking about like me personally, my fandom of the Commanders, or just
like, are you like, if you're ranking your fandom, are you like a hockey fan first for the Caps, maybe the Nationals first for you, maybe it's the Commanders? I'm just trying to figure out where you're at on the.
Sure. For me personally, I mean, I've lived here my whole life, and my dad was an original season ticket holder for the Caps, so I've always kind of had that special spot for the Capitals. So I'd put them at 1. I would put the Wizards second. I would put the Commanders third, just because I'm a big NFL fan. And I would put the Nats fourth, just because I'm not as into baseball as I am those other sports. So that would be my ranking before.
I thought maybe you were going to tell me you were an Orioles holdover, which is all right.
No, I mean, I grew up and went to Orioles games as a kid and as a college student, but that was a long time ago. I've kind of moved past the Orioles, and it's also weird too, like where we grew up. Everybody was Orioles fans because there were no Nationals at that point. It was just a natural progression. But I've never really identified as a Baltimore sports fan, which is kind of weird because my mom was from Baltimore. I rooted for the Orioles as a kid. I went to college in Baltimore, in Towson. So I mean, I have some Baltimore ties, but I've always been more of like, I grew up 10 minutes from the Capitol Center. Like I went to so many events and games and concerts there. Like it was just part of my part of my youth and adolescence. So I closely identify more with the Caps and then Bullets / Wizards because of that.
Are the Caps going to be good this year?
It's a good question. It hasn't been a great start. They've just been dogged by injuries. I mean, we knew they're going to struggle with injuries heading in with no Tom Wilson and no Nick Backstrom. But then, I think it was fourth game of the season, Connor Brown tears his ACL. Oshie's on the sideline now for an extended period of time. It's going to be tough for them to get some traction going. Hopefully by the early new year, early 2023, you're going to get good news on Wilson and hopefully Backstrom coming back. But it might be a tough slog for the Caps this year.
All right. There was a game yesterday. It did not work out the way that any of us as fans wanted it to. They're up 17-10 in fourth quarter, and just brutal mistakes killed them. What were your thoughts generally? We'll get into it a little bit more specifically, but generally, what did you think about the game yesterday?
Well, it's just hard. The Commanders, to me, they just live on the margins right now because they're just a team that's not going to score a lot of points. They're averaging, I want to say it's 17.7 points per game. And you would think, all right, that's kind of middle of the pack. And it's pretty far from middle of the pack. If you want middle of the pack scoring right now in the NFL through 9 weeks, you're talking about teams like Arizona, New England, Jacksonville. Those teams all score 22 points per game. And you think about those teams, you're like, I think we need to be better than, you want to be better than those teams scoring wise. Like, you want to be up in that 24 to 26 type range if you could. I just don't know if this team has that sort of capability. And that kind of caught up with them yesterday. The Vikings weren't fantastic, but they were just good enough. And that's kind of been their MO throughout this season so far. They haven't really blown teams out, but they've been in close games. They've got a good record in close games. And when you're living on the margins like the Washington offense, you can't afford the pick that Heineke threw. You can't afford, obviously,
and Thomas was wide open. And he was wide open there.
And look, we talk about it on the Junkies all the time. I love the Taylor Heineke story. He's a feel-good story. Look, the guy was out of the league and was like grasping in an XFL roster spot 2 or 3 years ago. And now, he's got 16 or 17 NFL starts under his belt. It's a great story, but he's a high-end backup that you want to come in and play a game or two to spell your starter, whoever that might be, if your starter is injured or you need a spark from your backup. But he's not a guy that you want to rely on for a month, 6-7 games. I just feel like your season's going to get away from you if that's the case. Now, it's not all Taylor's fault. They've got multiple issues. The offensive line is a work in progress, and that's putting it kindly. They can't really take pressure off him running the ball. They can't really sustain long drives with the running game because Robinson and Gibson, they've been okay. They haven't been, guys who crank out 4.5 yards per carry. That would be fantastic if they can get into that range. I feel like they need to utilize Gibson more too. I don't know what you think about that.
Definitely.
Especially with Dotson sidelined with the bad hammy, get him out into routes more often. Use him more as a weapon. I think it was the opener against Jacksonville where he caught the downfield pass, going toward the sideline, toward the right sideline. Let's see more of that from Gibby. Let's see some more innovation and, think outside of the box a little bit from Scott Turner on offense. If you're down Dotson, you need other playmakers. Gibson could be one of those guys. But yeah, they need to score more. And I just don't know if they're going to be able to do that with either Taylor or Carson if he comes back. I just don't know if that offensive line is going to give them enough time to find their targets, to find Terry. And let's keep peppering Terry with targets too. He had 9 yesterday. Let's get that up to 12 or 13, especially with Dotson sidelined.
I'm totally with you on Gibson. And it's odd. I've been a Turner fan. I like what he does. I mean, you can see people open a lot. However, his timing is terrible. And I never know what it's going to be, right? Last week, they started out with Gibson and made an effort to get Gibson going early, whether it was running the ball or catching it. This week it was Brian Robinson up the gut again. It was like, I know each week is a different week and they're all game planned differently, but I have a hard time figuring out what the game plan is from week to week, and that's my frustration.
That and we've broached this on the Junkies too. Is what is this team's offensive identity? Are they a running team?
Right.
Are they a team that concentrates on the passing game? And you just don't know exactly what they are. And part of that comes with having success on offense and building an identity. And I don't think they've had the opportunity to do that with Carson Wentz only in for a limited time. He goes out. Now you're dealing with Taylor Heineke, and if the season goes sideways 5 or 6 weeks from now, that people are already clamoring for Sam Howell.
Oh.
And if you're playing 3 quarterbacks in a season, I get it. Like if your season is completely lost and then you're just playing for draft position, okay, give Sam Howell a couple of starts, see if he's something that you can use going forward. Heineke, I believe his deal is up at the end of the year.
It is.
He's probably going to go out on the market, get a nice deal from somebody if it doesn't happen here. You have to keep building and see, is Sam Howell a guy who's in our future as a backup or potential starter? I don't know if he's really the potential starter. Like Ron's running out of time. Like, is he really going to hitch his wagon to a fifth round quarterback? Like how often do 5th round quarterbacks hit and work out and save guys?
You can count them on one hand. I'm certain of that.
I mean, it doesn't happen a lot. So I'd be shocked if that were the plan going forward in 2023. Maybe he's your backup. Maybe you develop him and groom him as the backup. But they're still grasping at a quarterback solution. After
every team that doesn't have one is.
They're still trying to find that guy. And Ron could go to Dan. I was going to say Dan Snyder if he's still the owner and say, I've always thought he has this escape hatch where you could go to Dan and say, Carson was the best guy that we could get. He wasn't really the guy that I loved, but he was the best guy that we could trade for, because we touched on this 10 minutes ago. What premier free agent, especially quarterback, wants to come here? None.
Well, which one of them make it to the market? I mean, good quarterbacks just aren't around, and that's
what I mean. Like they were able to trade for Carson Wentz. He had no say in the matter.
That's true.
So, like, they weren't going to woo Aaron Rodgers. They weren't going to lure Russell Wilson here. Maybe that's good after watching Russell Wilson play for the first 7 or 8 games.
Brutal for him.
You know what I mean? But like, their options were limited. So maybe Ron can weasel his way out of, if this turns into a bad year, which it's looking like, by saying, well, Carson wasn't my handpicked guy. Let me handpick my guy. But now the problem and the question is potential new ownership coming in.
Right.
So are you going to let Ron go pick whoever the next quarterback is if he's on a super hot seat heading into year 4? I don't know. There's a lot of,
because it sounds like the earliest a new owner be in is by March. So technically before the draft, but not like you'd be able to have all your whole. And so to your point, that's the question. Number one question going forward is, do you want Ron picking the next quarterback?
I think it's a valid question. Like his track record so far has been poor. Now I can understand, look, he inherited Dwayne Haskins, who had just been selected, I believe was the year before Ron
yes,
arrived.
Yep, that's right.
So he wanted to give him a chance to see if he could develop. That didn't work out. Tried Fitzpatrick, swing and a miss. Now tries Carson Wentz. And there's still time if Carson comes back from the finger injury and he takes the spot back and plays well, maybe he is the guy. Maybe they just say, hey, we can do this with Carson with an improved offensive line through free agency in the draft. Maybe Carson's the guy in 2023, but are you comfortable with that?
Not me personally. Not me personally. But it's interesting because they definitely are going. My understanding is, from everything I've heard, is they definitely are going back to Wentz when he's healthy. Like, I know everybody wants Heineke to be the guy, but they put a lot into Wentz. And they're not
Sure.
going to they're not just going to throw it away and say we blew it after 4 games. I refuse to believe that.
Yeah, I think if Taylor Heineke were to go 3-1 or 4-0, the 4-0 ship has sailed now.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're going to beat the Eagles on Monday Night Football in Philadelphia. I went on the show earlier today and said there's 0% chance that
10.5 point spread. Big one.
0% chance. I mean, barring a miracle, they're not going to beat Philly. I'm Philly. I don't think they're, the greatest NFL team ever assembled, but they're vastly superior right now to the Commanders. And do I think they're going to go unbeaten this season? No, I think they'll stub their toe at some point. I don't think it's going to be against the Commanders. But I think if Taylor went 3-1 in that 4-game stretch, he would have it would be hard for Ron to then turn to the team and say, hey, we're going back to Carson. Like, they're on a roll.
Yeah.
At 2-2, he's got more. Well, let's get it back to Carson. He's healthy. The schedule eases up a little bit with Houston, Atlanta. I can certainly see him going back to Carson especially if and when the Commanders lose to the Eagles on Monday night.
And the other problem, Cakes, is that, and maybe this is even worse than being really bad, is they're going to be mid the rest of the season, right? And end up with a 15 or 14 draft pick and be nowhere near up where you got to be for a quarterback. And then, maybe you're getting, left tackle 1 in that situation. I hate to be looking all the way there, but
yeah,
I think that's the problem. It's frustrating because I think with the defense alone, they should be able to get to 500. I'm curious. I know you guys talked to John Allen this morning, right? He's usually on Mondays.
He's on Tuesdays. RG3
on Tuesday.
On Mondays.
Okay, my bad. I was going to ask. I'd have been curious to know from a defensive player standpoint, like how frustrating it must be. They played their tails off yesterday, and to get beat from behind, it just had to be brutal.
Oh, I'm sure it rankles him and Payne. But Jonathan Allen, he's so classy. He's such a good guy. He's not going to come out and bury Taylor or Carson and put it on them for playing a bad game. He'll say it was a team loss, even though I'm sure behind closed doors, he's pissed at the way things are working out. That they're doing their part. They're holding up their end. Like he and Payne are a pretty immovable force there in the middle of that defensive line. Daron Payne is going to get paid, whether it's
I ask everybody that comes on because it's newsworthy. Do you think they will pay him?
It seems
do you
like
think they should pay him.
I really love the way he's played this year. He's got 5.5 sacks, a career high. He looks nearly impossible to run against. They probably should pay him. The problem is, like, you're paying Allen, you're paying Payne. Sweat's going to come up in a few years. Chase Young, if you're going to pay him, it's just you only have a certain amount of capital that you can allocate to your defensive line. You can't pay everybody there. I know that it seemed like early in the season or in the offseason, there were rumblings that, hey, maybe we'll trade Payne, get a few picks back. Now that pendulum seems to have swung to, well, we'd like to get a deal done with Payne if we can, if the numbers work. But the longer it doesn't get done, the more good games he keeps putting under his belt, the more expensive he's going to become as well.
Well, and to your point, why would he ever take less than the $17.5 or $18 million that Jonathan Allen took last year? And now that we've seen the Bradley Chubb contract for whatever that was, $68 million, 112 overall, I don't know that Sweat's going to get Bradley Chubb money, but that's a chunk for 3 defensive linemen.
Yeah, it's a lot. Then you have to start spending on the offensive side. And I'm always more of a proponent of spending more on your offense than on your defense, because I just feel like the rules and the way the game is played in 2022 they're already tilted in favor of the offense. So why wouldn't you make your offense as strong as possible? Like, you might be able to cut some corners on the defense here and there, but I feel like you got to spend on offense. You have to have 2 or 3 solid, if not spectacular, wide receivers to attack opposing defenses. And we've seen this team willing to spend. They spent money on Terry McLaurin. They went out and got Curtis Samuel because they knew they needed to upgrade. And then they drafted Dotson. So I'll give them credit that they realize that we're not playing 1970s era 2.5 yards and a cloud of dust football anymore. Like we have to have some thoroughbreds on the offense, and they're doing that. Now, the first year Curtis was a wash. Obviously, he's contributing this year. The only problem, like Terry has played with so many quarterbacks in his pro career already. I feel bad for him that I feel like his numbers would be 25 or 30% higher across the board, touchdowns, yards, everything, if he just had stability at quarterback, which he's never had.
And it's why they haven't had it as a franchise, because the NFL has proven to you, to your point, it's an offensive league. You have got to be able to score points, 17 points. They could have scored points at the end of the first half. Ron's time management drives me absolutely insane. They could have called a timeout at 3:19. I don't think they call one until like a minute 40 something. They give up points at the end of the first half all the time. It drives me crazy. Did you like the Ron hiring at the time? How do you feel about it now?
I liked it at the time because he was brought in when basically the carnival tent was on fire, and they needed like a steadying hand, a guy who's been through that sort of thing before. And Ron's experienced this already in Carolina. Like he had upheaval with the ownership there, so he was the perfect guy to bring in at that point. So, but he could have been the perfect guy then, and he's doesn't seem like the perfect guy now. Like some of his coaching tendencies, and you pointed some of them out, the challenges, poor clock management, unwillingness to try to score toward the end of a half when you have 90 seconds or close to 2 minutes on the clock and timeouts in your pocket. It's going to be 3 seasons now, and you're going to have one backdoor playoff appearance, barring a miracle this year. I know they're still in contention, but I just nothing about what I see from this team at this point makes me think that they're a playoff team, even though I know that they're contending for a wild card spot. So after 3 seasons, you have one playoff appearance, and that was when your team had a losing record in your first year here. I don't know if he's ready to be thrown overboard at this point, but I know that his seat is getting super hot if he doesn't make the playoffs this season. It's
got to be hot. What do you think? What do you think the record will end up being by the end of the year? I think they're still around 500.
I was super bullish in April. I think when we made our first preseason predictions, I believe my call was 10-7. I am not going to stick by that at this point. I would say I'd probably just flip it. I'd say they're looking like a 7-10 team instead of a 10-7 team at this point. Right. Now, the problem is some of those games that you look at, like back when the schedule comes out, you're like, oh, the Giants seems like, you should sweep the Giants. Well, this Giants team with a first-year coach has come in with a quarterback that he or the franchise doesn't want any part of because they didn't pick up his 5th-year option, and has them right at the top of the division, along with behind the Philadelphia Eagles, of course. But they're contending for a playoff spot in year 1, and coaching it's not a record.
Coaching matters.
So that does not bode well for Ron when other younger coaches, less experienced coaches like Brian Daboll in New York, like Sirianni in Philly, are coming in and getting results quickly. And he can't point to, oh, well, Brian, I know he caught flack for it with his quarterback answer a few weeks ago at the press conference. But I mean, Daniel Jones is a quarterback in New York, and he's been a disaster before this year. But somehow Daboll has found a way to play to his strengths and to limit his turnovers. Sirianni in Philadelphia has leaned into Jalen Hurts and just embraced his rushing chops here. And now you see what happens when they've been patient with Jalen Hurts, gave him another offseason to develop. And look, he's not going to throw for 40 touchdowns like a Josh Allen, but if he rushes for 10 or 12 and throws for 20 to 23 touchdowns and limits his turnovers, limits his mistakes, you see what the Eagles are doing. It's working. So those guys coming in and having success early in their tenures does not work well for Ron, for the way he struggled so far. And a lot of that goes back to quarterback.
Yep. I see you got your MGM hat on. I know you do a lot of partnerships with them. You guys got anything coming up in the near future?
I'll always have the Cakes Classic, which is a no limit hold'em tournament that I host the first Wednesday of every month. Would love to have you out for it at some point if you're into poker.
Oh, yes.
Extend you an invite. But the poker room there is great, even if it's not for my event. It's the spot where we've held multiple Junkies Poker Opens, had just an amazing turnout for the last one. I'm sure where the plans are ramping up already to do it again in 2023. So yeah, it's definitely a good partnership that I have with them, and that our station 106.7 The Fan has with them as well.
No, that's great stuff. Hey, Cakes, I appreciate it, man. I had a blast today. We'll do this again sometime.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, no doubt.
It was fun. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Good.